Every leader thinks they have a good response for a moment of crisis. Basically, companies have organized over the time ways to respond for risks, for problems, for issues, and they organize those plans in a way that they think that when something arrives, they will know what to do. But this is not the reality in all the companies, and unfortunately, looking more abroad, even from a state perspective, from a country perspective, we have much more to learn. We had interesting research that was published recently by Albers, McCarthy, and Groen, and that was published in the MIT Sloan Management Review, the last one. And basically, in this research, they are trying to understand what kind of skills and behaviors are coming from those leaders and companies, and as I said, countries, states, platforms who have better response for crisis moment, or at least how they are more prepared, and even to contain, to avoid that the crisis will affect or have an impact in the business. This data is quite interesting because they are researching from a broader perspective. They have in the report, for example, a former prime minister, they have CEOs, the head of central bank, chief of defense, and national fire chief. So it's a quite broad perspective when it comes to crisis, because this is how we should look into that. Risk management, of course, when you think about the the hypothesis of managing things that could or could not happen, you can bring that from a very small scope, like your little project, but you can extend that in many different ways. And managing risks, or at least considering that something could happen and you need to have a plan to respond to those things, it's a way to also define if your company, your business can survive when something bad is happening and you need to respond. And what they say is basically that, or the main finding is that doing good crisis management is not a gift. This is basically a skill, is something that you develop. And they classify those skills or those abilities, those things that made a big difference, in 7 areas, 7 things that basically those leaders are doing differently that are preventing or helping the companies to be more prepared for those critical moments. And of course, they pack those into a nice framework. I like those. They simplify sometimes complex things. And in this case, it's one of them. They call this the 7 C's of leadership in moment of crisis. And basically, they have 7 words. All those words starts with the letter C, so that's quite easy to understand why 7 C's, right? But basically, I will start one by one and bring my perspective on those, okay? The number one goes for contingency, and basically it is about the plan, right? What can go wrong? What are the roles and responsibilities when something goes wrong, and what can be done in case those things are happening? So it is about planning. It is about preparing, and it is about also knowing what you need to do. Who is going to do that? Are they trained? Do they know how to respond? Do they know what are their roles on that? And this is something that, if you think from a smaller scope, like your specific project, this is quite critical. Because sometimes we do like risk management in the beginning of the project. We think about those things that should happen, or could happen, or can happen, but we forget to, over the time, keep coming those to discussion, and make sure that the people who have the ownership of doing something, they know what they need to do, they have access to those resources, and they know that if something happened, they are the owners to do something. The second C goes for clarity, and this is a critical one, okay? Clarity goes for communicating, and of course communicating clearly what is happening and what is truly happening. When they mention clarity in the report, they are saying that it's critical that you share all the information in the moment of a crisis. Because if you're trying to hide something, because maybe it will be bad for your area or can be bad for your reputation, you are creating another big risk. So you should prepare your teams, your leadership to always make sure that they are sharing the big picture and not hiding something. Think about the Chernobyl disaster. How many times they lost, how many things they could maybe have avoided if they start with trust and sharing the proper and right information from the beginning without any fear of the consequences. And basically, that is something that you need to train in your leadership, train in your teams to know that when something is happening, they should speak up. The third one goes for coordination. And of course, this is about connecting not just like what you need to what you have to do, what your team have to do, but also how the areas are going to connect. So coordination goes of course to like how people are going to talk, how they will be able to respond, what they can do, how they will be able to organize themselves. For those people who have the who need to take some ownership, do they know who they need to talk, how to engage other people? And this is critical. This is critical because sometimes when something bad is happening, people can sometimes freeze. And it's important that with the right coordination, those with ownership for some area or for some response, they know very clearly what they need to do, who they need to engage, and the other people around, they know, or at least they are prepared if they are engaged that they should do or act in something. The next one goes for compassion. And this is really about empathy because many times when it comes for crisis and risks and problems happening, it has a huge effect on people. I just mentioned that the Chernobyl case, a tragedy going against like people's lives. We had recently a big flood in the south of Brazil a few years ago, and that was another example. Like when you have a crisis happening, you need to coordinate, you need to act, you need to be prepared, but you need to also remember that you have people involved. Sometimes in those big cases, it can be people's lives, but sometimes also in a project, in a company, it can be it can mean people's jobs. And you need to be prepared to work with those crises also with empathy for the people who are affected. You understand that there's a person on the other side, and you have, as the word say, compassion for those people in those moments. The next one goes for confrontation, and I like this one very much because it's sometimes you need to face the hard truth and face it very early. And the earlier you start to going for confrontation, I mean, understand that you need to go even sometimes against your past decisions, the earlier the better. We have many cases where companies they were too late to assume that they did a mistake and to do some action, and they basically don't act at all. And sometimes, many times, a bad decision can be better than no decision at all. Because a bad decision made you learn and maybe you whacked fast and decide again and you change. So you need to go and face the hard truth in front of you. Sometimes this is what will help you or support you to save your company, to save your business. The number six goes for control. And of course, this is about like order. And it's order without centralizing everything. You need to empower people, empower teams to know what are the boundaries and the limits and how they can act. And basically, the more you prepare for the people, the better control you also have because they know what are the guardrails that they can act, what they can do, how they can be more prepared. And if you have this kind of control, even though it's a moment of crisis that things are changing more quickly, this kind of control will also come back with a better response for the crisis itself. So it's like it's something that you give more and less sometimes for the people in terms of freedom to act, but you get it back in terms of control because you know that the right person is acting, is taking responsibility. But back to like the broader perspective, things are moving and responses are happening in terms of supporting you to come out of those crisis moments. And finally, the last one, it goes for continuity, or basically, what do you do after the crisis? Are you prepared to learn something with that? Companies and countries who go over a crisis and walk away as nothing happened normally are those who are not taking anything new to them, and probably in the next crisis they will suffer again or even more. We have big examples for like countries who went to big disasters, and they understood that if they don't change something, don't build some kind of infrastructure, don't build some kind of guardrails or preparations, something bad can happen again. So you need to learn something from what happened. You need to learn something from your mistakes. You need to learn something from your industry. You need to always learn something new from those moments. And this is quite crucial. As you can see, this is not a checklist. It's pretty much more like a organizing your knowledge, your understanding that crisis can happen and can affect you. And the more prepared you are, the more your people are prepared, the better is going to be your response. And perhaps the faster you can leave those situations. And the more organized you are for those kind of hard discussions, hard conversations, the better for the future of your business.